Okay, are we live? Yeah. Hello, everyone. Welcome to tonight's episode. The title is When the World Moves Behind Our Eyes. And I consider that the world moves two ways. It moves subjectively for the human being, and it moves objectively. The sense of subjectivity and the sense of objectivity, they come across as two different dimensions. That means the texture of an object is different from the texture of a subject. Yet we see what they have in common, your thoughts and matter, what they have in common is design. It's the consideration of design. Any moment there is an awareness of design, there can be applied both imaginative movement and real movement. So the real and the unreal have a sort of shape in our awareness. Okay? So, for example, you see that some people believed in angels back in the day, and nowadays people are like, hey man, what is this angel thing? You know? But the concept of the angel, the image that was communicated to that person, which was considered to be real by them, it had an image. I'm trying to say that our imagination has a design that we can acknowledge, but it's not visible. So if I was to imagine right now a canoe, I'm sitting on the porch, a canoe hovering in the air, you know, slowly moving in the air, I can imagine that. I could visualize it. I could visualize, just my mind can overlay this objective space with many subjects. But the thing is, the subject is not external. So we wonder where it is, and I consider it's as if it's the mind's invisible room. That means thoughts and many different things are in your awareness, yet they are not here tangible. So I find that the purpose of life is to see what's here, firstly. As if not only your senses of perception, your five major senses of perception, have a sort of purpose inbuilt into them. As if your ears are meant to hear music, you know, the sounds of this earth, the sounds of this world, and your eyes are meant to see forms, the various colors. And so when we look at the sophistication of how we keep ourselves as creatures, internally we keep ourselves as a character in a story. This character excuse me, this character is the entity, the persons, or the presence of the moment's generation. You sculpt an identity out of a world with many forms. You shape yourself as different from the world in order to see yourself in a world. So it's very unique. When I look at history, when I look at how intelligent we are, human beings are like, it's very unique. We are like robots that can wonder about our design, okay? Which is making us feel that we're not just the program of nature. If you just think you're an objective being, let me tell you what's going to happen. Your free will is nature, how nature chooses to move, okay? But if the free will can be comprehended in an unconditional state, that means the conditions of the universe, the laws of the universe, do not carry out in your mind. As if in my mind I could visualize that canoe in the air, the gravity is not applying on my thoughts, okay? And so it's this very unique thing that a part of our intelligence works with how our attention is here, and a part of our intelligence works with identifying with what's in our attention. You know, it's kind of like Plato's allegory of the cave. Those dudes are kind of chained in that cave looking at the shadows and thinking the shadows are the only truth. The moment they step out of the cave, they suddenly see a complete restructuring of the system and values of truth. So that's the point of the journey. This is why many mystical minds on this earth, they looked at life, they recognized the amount of vastness of data, and they wondered, what do I do in a world so big? And so the small for the first time wondered, wondered about its relationship with the big. The microcosmic was like, holy shit, there's galaxies behind those clouds. And so there came the magnificent wonder of, in some sense, imagination to assist reality. It's kind of one of these things many children don't find they're told, in some sense. When I say many children, pretty much many people, they don't recognize the world they see is firstly the world they see. Okay, so when I, for example, see someone on the street, the idea I get of them is not them. It is my first impressions, how in some sense thoughts are associating us and ascribing automatically to matter. You see, if you tend to imagine right now you chose to be a person that you just lived an emotional life. You did not care about any other sort of data, only in accordance to how it made you feel. Okay? If you went as a purely emotional being, you're going to recognize every set of data you get, every new environment you get in, it will bring forth a new emotion. So I realize after 27 laps around the sun that this mind endlessly is entertaining what it considers is real. And so in the Rig Vedas, this ancient kind of mystical scripture, this mystical text, it is said, that the mind is a slave to the real, but who you are is not your mind. It is not even your ideas of soul. That means metaphysics in philosophy is kind of, it's cute when a person says I'm a soul, but they have not comprehended it, because the comprehension of the soul is an echoing of what is valid in the individual activity, in the cosmic activity, in the collective activity. So suddenly your soul becomes the soul of the world. Suddenly the soul of the world becomes all that the moment can be. So then the final stages, it's as if like so many people are searching for truth here on this planet. So many people are searching for purpose. You know, they have only two places to go, two directions. They either go towards an individual purpose or they go towards a collective purpose. You know, the collective purpose means that this individual game of the person suddenly begins to have an importance to how the collective is kept. Once you care for your civilization, it is like waiting for you to set it free. We are 8 billion creatures on an empty rock. Let us not forget this. Let us not get too comfortable on this planet with thinking that we know what's going on. There is a vast amount of unknownness, as vast as the sky. And when you look at the sky, and if you were to tell a scientist, measure the sky for me, and you see the scientist will say there's no ruler long enough. You begin to see man's knowledge in regards to comprehending the unknown ways intelligence is present in this world has limits. But what do we do when we get to the limits? What do we do when we get to the wall of the world? It's like that moment in ancient times where they believed like the world was like a square. And so the ship that went to the edge of the ocean suddenly flew into empty space. And so it was the notion that the edge of the world is not this world. So we are, it's kind of crazy. It's a very unique situation we're in, you know, especially because the designs are here before we choose it. So we are like eyes that have already like the child opens its eyes in a world that already has creatures in it moving it. So the first thing of every generation, every child on this planet first says, holy shit, let me see what's going on everywhere. Imagine you had one world and this whole world was yours and you wanted to be like, okay, let me see what's happening on it first. So first, from the selfish visions of life, we suddenly wonder about what else there could be. In our wonder of what else there could be, we come to a moment where nobody can push us. You come to a moment where you look at this life and you're like, whoa, there's an incredible amount of how can I tell you? There's life on this planet. This planet is alive because we are. The world behind our eyes moves with attention. Attention at its core is attributeless. That's something funny you realize. When you meditate a little bit, you'll suddenly notice this, that your attention has no character. So what that means is When the teacher says pay attention in class, what does that objectively mean? How can attention be the forms in attention? It's like there is a delay between the sun's beam entering our eyes before we could see the intelligence there. You see, this is what I was afraid of, and I feel all educational systems globally will come to this. They will suddenly freak out. And if nobody tells them, they're going to really freak out. And it is the edge of knowledge. The end of the world, some say, okay? The end of the world of knowledge. So I noticed something. I have a very unique way of acknowledging religion and a very unique way of acknowledging a secular reality. And the first thing I realize, you see, is that all human beings are building meaning. Every single person. It's like when a design fulfills its design, it suddenly feels there is nothing more left. So like the first immediate purpose of life becomes an acceptance of the evolutionary phase and the limitations of the being. You know, it's like we don't want to put the species on a survival task where it's trying to push a building. Like you can't push a building with your hands. You see, you cannot change the laws of nature in your mind. You will eventually realize that's what humility is. So it's as if, trust me, we feel we're individuals, but the individual has nowhere to go other than a collective vision. You'll see, it's kind of like the scientist comes and says evolution has nothing to do with supernatural ideas of the soul or God or whatever. You know, the scientist comes and protects evolution from the transcendental dimension. Okay? By denying the transcendental dimension. But you'll see the scientist who is rejecting eternity seldom realizes that eternity seems to be the inspiration of a temporary being that doesn't want to die. You see, our minds will forever move towards the eternal because we're considering we're not. Whatever you are not, right now you want the opposite. Just think about it. If you don't have money, you're like, I want money. You know, if you don't have many things, you'll suddenly want the things because your mind automatically wonders about the polar opposite. Once you realize the polar opposites, that this is something they don't tell you about desire. Desire only exists in a dualistic condition. The moment the world is no longer dual, that is, there's no longer good and bad, there's just the watcher of both, as if certain ancient poets came to us and said, your mind is like a bird where its wings are chaos and order. So your mind functions with emptiness, fullness, with presence, absence. And as you constantly wonder about your true nature, you will eventually see it. It's as if the person who was faking it eventually recognized what it was all about. The eyes open in ways that nature allows. When the world moves behind our eyes, heaven is building earth anew. It's as if nature's collective intelligence is too, it's here. That's something I wondered. It was one of those, like I feel every child, as they become curious and interested in the world they're in, they will eventually ask deep questions. It's an honorable thing, you know? The human condition is not meant to be a static way. The fact that we still in our political systems vote for a static individual, for the idea of a person to lead the country, is false. I feel our civilization is 100 years not behind, but not inconsiderate. That means sometimes it's like if you notice, guilt comes into existence when you know what the right thing was and you didn't do it. Okay? So when your nature shouted at you, behave properly, and then you were like, no. You know, there's a war. It's very funny. My intuition, I say it to people, it has, my mind has moved in many ways on this earth. And even as I speak now, every moment is its own novelty. Every moment is its own infinite dimension. I mean, think about it. The person who wants to, how is heaven marketed to people? It is marketed as a place where you get everything you want. But when you look at the human condition, we're not even thoughts to go to heaven. Do you see? It is more like we overreact. We not over. We just reacted to the environment, and then we suddenly became entranced by the patterns of nature. Entranced means you are. It's as if like it's an illusion. Somebody put a box on your head, and you were like, okay, that's good. You know, this box is comfortable. And so your eyes did not evolve as fast. So this is my request from our civilization, from every person who is alive. Look at this world clearly and then decide what you do. You know, look at this world very, very deeply and clearly and sincerely. Look at the world and see what it means. What is it to you? What do you see in this world that's here? Once you have that real view, you'll suddenly tap into a state where your intelligence is no longer fragmented. That's when you return to the eternal remembrance. In ancient Vedanta, they would say you suddenly remember. You suddenly remember how the winds of this world moved your consciousness beyond language. What are we living for? How are we living for it? And what is even alive? A new renaissance of metaphysical self-inquiry should begin. People should suddenly feel the world has lied to them. That's when you begin finding your independence. When you see that there is some part of your intelligence willing to respond to the greater potentials of efficiency. You care. That's the point. The story we tell ourselves dictates our actions. I'm telling you, right now you could get a piece of paper, even after you hear my talk, go do this. Go get a piece of paper and just get serious. Forget everything and just get this piece of paper and write down how you have seen your life from its beginning to the end and to this present moment. And write that in a book. Write that in paper, on paper. Write it with your hands. Don't type it. Write it. Okay? And you're going to eventually see the first efforts of your mind to be you. So for me, it was very unique. At first, I thought I was my mind, so I felt I was this reactive animal. Then I realized I'm not my mind, so I began observing my mind. Then I was like nothing, but still observing animalistic kind of reactivity. That means you react like an animal. It's too much instincts have controlled. Free will has not emerged properly. Your free will, you might not believe it, it gets born. It gets born when you can consider yourself as an individual system in a collective system. Our eyes change, which in some sense suggests that how incredible is this? The same way that you have blown candles on birthday cakes, okay, throughout your life, you have had different, like, as the years went by, your physical body not only changed, but so did your views and awareness of the world. But you'll realize in every single birthday you considered, it's still you, you know, as if I am growing. The I is there, and then it is, as it is still there, it grows. You begin to see you have been changelessly observing change from the beginning of the waking moment. And time is your artwork. How you hold the brush suggests what kind of picture you draw for yourself. You know what kind of responsibility this commands? The moment we realize 4 billion years of evolution, and this science project has brought us towards this position where the ape has not only stood up, not only has its attention, its eye stood up within the subjective evolution, but it has come to be a carer for the world because it can consider it. Trust me, it's like regardless if you say saving something is good and not saving something is bad, okay? Whether it's sacrificial or not, whether it's one of those situations where the person jumps to save the person even though the risk is high. For me, it's you have to recognize first your whole moment of being. As you realize your whole moment of being, you suddenly calm down because you recognize the mind doesn't function as a location. It is the awareness of the location. Your mind and your thoughts and how you have considered this relationship, trust me, first of all, it's your own unique view. Whenever just try this, go ask someone who they are, and the answer that they give will show you how they are, how they have chosen to see themselves. The mind moves in many ways, and there are many levels to it as can be conceived. That was the evolution of our language. That was the gift of language. Language was like a gift from the gods. Do you see? That creatures could suddenly speak. And as they could speak, they reached a position where their acknowledgement of speech began evolving, which I feel this led to the evolution of the actual brain. That means certain part of your brains, for example, the reptilian aspect of your brain, it took a couple, like, I don't know what the numbers are, but like it took some billion years. Like different parts of your brain have evolved differently. And what that means is that the forces of nature chose to allow the ape to wear a suit. We are not just a lost creature in a world bigger than us. We are the world where this creature is choosing to take value from, to take meaning from. And it's very important because we have not understood the value of intelligence. I am telling you, fear is greater in our civilization than intelligence. And whenever there is fear, there is past chains. When there are past chains, that means there are unauthorizations for novelty. Okay, fear doesn't allow you to recognize every moment is an opportunity. There was a poet, ancient Persian poet by the name of Attar. Um, and Attar of Nishapur, this man had such an incredible depth in his writings. For me, poetry is emotions steering the rational mind. It is irrational emotions challenging the rational mind. That's poetry, and it's very remarkable because he considers this thing where he says, how would I say it? Rumi has this saying, in ancient Persian culture, there were some very notable poets who, once the culture was under attack, these poets went nonstop, just writing lines of poetry that could preserve the mystical essence, the most valuable ideals in the civilization. You know, you don't understand. Sometimes poetry from ancient times was the last stance of what the eyes of that being could see, as if its eyes were like, I am here for a little while, but these words could remain longer. And so what values shall move through the generations? What kind of beacons shall be passed? What sort of responsibility? How will the children of the future generations open their eyes? How will the educational system prepare them for a world that could be meaningless, but suddenly meaningful, and then meaningless? And as we oscillate through a changing world, we'll come to see the universe as if has given a command to matter to change, but has given a command to space to be still. You kind of see um, you choose how your free will emerges in the moment. And it has to do with contentment. And contentment is what I consider a priority of inner work. That means it's like if the artist who's put the let's say paper or whatever, canvas or something in front of him, if he doesn't feel free, you cannot draw art. Whenever you don't feel free, when you don't feel free and you draw something, you're taking the attention of people to the misery. Art is the greatest thing art can be an encouragement. That's it. That's it. You look at the artwork and you're like, holy shit, those colors can stand by one another. I'm going to share with you, actually I'll get back to this. Rumi had this quote where he said, me and Hafez are just in the streets, checking the streets of this enlightened paradise. And they're saying Attar is walking, is there. It has searched this like cities, 7 cities or something, like of the heavens. And so it's this crazy notion that it's saying that based on one's honesty, their intelligence activates. If you can totally choose to be dishonest. Nobody can tell you what to do because you is your idea. And you choose how you walk. You choose how you generate meaning. This is why for me, I have not avoided, but a lot of anger never came my way because when I looked at the world, I did not see language as the entity. I saw the language, the effect of the entity's reaction in that moment, the response. So for me, I began to realize every person I have judged ever since my life till now, not till now, but like till when I realized this, I recognized it was like, how would I tell you, it was chaotic. I recognized I had savagely judged the world and reacted to it rather than watching it as it was to change. Every person has I'm going to be very playful here, has a spirit guide, and that spirit guide is called change. It is the intelligence of life journeying through conscious manifest change. Enjoy the ride. Recognize the designer's eyes. The designer is not a concept in a book. It is the eyes that observe design. You know? Our species is a young species, I consider. What that means is we're making a lot of mistakes, but the world's like, all right, guys, you're young. You know, we're not gonna judge you. You know, like it's the responsibility level of our civilization right now is like at a 12-year-old level. I have noticed that ideas can be very powerful. And Victor Hugo, this visionary, has this quote where he says, nothing is more powerful than an idea in which its time has come. So what that means is nothing is more powerful than how the world is changing now. And if your eyes choose to see it clearly, you free yourself. You see, in Zen there's a saying, it says, when you want to climb a mountain, start at the top. What that means is if you are to seek greater efficiency, consider yourself greatly efficient as in the instant, in right now, like in the now. Where else can it be? Responsibility is just the way the mind generates itself, where it works with the intelligence of the world. Irresponsibility is a sort of reaction to rejection. I'm telling you, you won't believe how much of violence on this planet is reaction to a sort of rejection in childhood. That rejection denied the child's reality to fit into the real world. So because the child couldn't fit in the real world, it chose its imagination. And if the imagination was chaotic and the child did not have discretion, violence expressed. So I am telling you, it's sometimes when you study something you don't know anything about, you first ask questions. So when you look at a world you don't know anything about, you ask questions. These questions are not questions. Like, this is why a true question asked doesn't matter. The person who asks it knows the intensity of the answer. Now, the title of tonight's episode, When the World Moves Behind Our Eyes, guys, commands me, requires me, the speaker of this idea, to have to share a deeper view of imagination. So I'm going to get into it, and I haven't gotten this deeply into explaining the imagination, but I'm going to explain what I feel imagination is, at least in my experience. You see, imagine the eyes of, not like the eyes of the person has opened in the morning. They're going about their day. When they start, okay, and they look at stuff, the moment you look at an object, because you have incorporated the technology of language in your intelligence, it will generate a thought. So any object suddenly in your mind automatically classifies as a certain thought or a certain word. So I am telling you, the first thing you become aware of is that you are using language. The mask of language is all over the world. The subjective soul, you recognize there's a dimension of your intelligence which has to do with how language moves in your experience. There's a dimension of experience that has to do with your free will, with how you are as a moment. And then there's a aspect to the moment, a sort of dimension where, how would I say it? It's like how the world is shaping you, how you are shaping yourself, and how the unknown is shaping you. So how the known world is shaping you, how the unknown is shaping you, and how you are shaping yourself. These are like three lines that are intersecting in one point. And so that one point is the current moment. That's the power of the presence of being. So once you become aware of how the phenomena is present, you begin to recognize phenomena changes at different speeds. Your thoughts come and go quicker than how the physical world changes. But when you're watching a football game, for example, because your attention is on the ball, your thoughts don't change until you see what happens. You see, so there's different intensities, and you begin to realize thoughts change quicker than physicality. So this is why suddenly some objects for you can become meaningless in an instant. They give the child a toy, the child's like, I'm so happy, and suddenly they take the toy away, and the child cries. I think I said choi there. But the child suddenly cries. They give the toy back, the child is happy. Do you see how instantly the state of mind of the child changed? Now, as we grow, we bunker up into this sort of like, just like how Tony Stark had an Iron Man suit, every person has their egoic construct of self. This egoic construct of self has existed based on values that were generated with stories your attention identified with in the moment. In some stories, you might have made an inefficient decision and you might have come across as the bad person. In a story, you might have done a certain efficient thing and you might have come across as a good person. You see, but you begin to see you're not defined. Your actions don't define you. You define your actions. Your thoughts don't define you. You define your thoughts. You don't define you, because what you're considering to be the definer is raw attention, raw experiential active attention. So you free yourself by coming into the here and now, by recognizing that your mind is generating this. Where else are the values coming from? And at first it might be surprising. You might suddenly be surprised how the meaning of the world is in your eyes. Your eyes will become like your temple. You will see the divinity. It's as if sometimes there's some days that I'm alive where I look into the future, like my mind tries to contemplate my future, and suddenly I begin to see I have no idea what will happen. I have no idea how long I'm present, how long I am here. Okay, but as I am here, it has become of interest for me to, in some sense, live in a world that changes the next day, because it all changes. So it is about, believe it or not, societies will be healthier psychologically if they acknowledge deeper dimensions that are actually there to the individual. So this means that nobody can know your mind better than you. And if you, whoever you think you are, seek efficiency, you have to activate all the dimensions of your intelligence. You can't just in one, with one way. It's as if the guy who was late for work got his keys from the table, but instead of going in his car, was running to work, and suddenly he felt something was off. you know, and so that's what I'm saying. That's what I'm saying. It has to do with the grace of your attention. And if your attention disgraces itself, it stops trying to look externally, so it justifies the world in a more imaginary sense. And it doesn't mean and the world doesn't have to be some rational, logical machine either, you know? It's funny, it's like they should write in our history books, before human beings built robots, they started to act like them. If human beings ever get to a point where we are suddenly walking on the street and we see AI kind of walking on the street as well, we see like robotic people buying Centennial Man style kind of walking, you know? Time is the moving image of eternity, as Plato says. Your imagination is a nation of, you're sitting on that chair, you're not, it's not the same. Do you see I have sat on the same chair the same day, not like like many days, and I have recognized I've never sat on the same chair in the same way twice. As Heraclitus would say, no man steps on the same river twice, and it's not the same man and it's not the same river. That means the law of change, all phenomena abides by it, and the only thing that doesn't is pretty much an observance within. This observance within means you suddenly realize the presence of what is looking out through your eyes. This is what you are. An aspect of you is biological, it's a skeleton with flesh around it, and you're this evolved biological creature after billions of years. And another aspect of you is the watcher. It's the presence within the personality that is the gaze of the moment. That is how the attention is here. So pretty much your mind's next greater kind of explorations occur when you study your own presence. When you study your presence, you suddenly see who you really are. And whether silence becomes your teaching or noise, whether words should change your world or worlds should change your words. The eyes of man have an ever-present continuous quality to them till the day they die. Conscious continuous quality. Rabindranath Tagore, this Indian polymath, this incredible mind, had this quote where he said, um, faith is the bird that feels dawn before uh, that in the darkness feels dawn on its wings. I don't know, something like that. So it's kind of like this idea that it's at like the bird is in the darkest hour of its life in the dark sky, but because it feels the warmth of the sun in its wings, the warmth is like the ultimate hope that in some sense generates faith. If you look at faith, it has to do with the future. Because it has to do with the future is contained through stories. This is why religions and if even science, like tomorrow we see suddenly gives a story as profound as religion, you know, we're going to see people are going to look at what story to run to. That means you give them a story that they can, their imagination buys into. In some sense, how can I tell you? Elon Musk said it, if you make somebody ask the wrong question, in some sense, you don't have to worry about their answers. And I feel that has been the mistake in our history, that we have forgot the value of observing both sides of the polarity. We are scared from evil, and we are in some sense running to the good, you know. And I'm like, what is this? What is this game of the mind that for eons we have been characters tormented by how the world sculpted our stories? When will we be free? Zen Master Chung Tzu has this quote where he says, he says, I don't remember the exact quote, but he says, like, your thoughts are like leaves on a tree. They come and go through the seasons. They change in texture and quality as life continues. Then what will freedom mean? How can we define freedom in a changing world? If we define it by a social structure, a cultural structure, a narrative structure, we will see it's changing all the time. So the ultimate freedom is an unconditional awareness. That's a sort of eternal liberation, because there's no temporary identification with reality. It's a strange way of recognizing the attributeless quality of the mind, just like the child before learning language was just a moment of sight. And then this moment of sight, it tends to be by the age of, I don't know, like 14 or something. I don't know what age psychologists say, but I've heard it's 14, where the individual, and it makes sense. Like you can kind of see it, that the child will eventually choose to be an individual at that point. A child who doesn't choose, it's an individual. It's like that's what the parents should worry about in children. When does this child choose to be a person in this world? And at first, many children get past that point. They can suddenly be individual people. But then comes the problem of dependence and independence. That means we are all raised with the blessings of those around us. You know, like the parents of the child raised the child, okay, in ways that the child cannot even understand, you know? For me, religion was an effort to shape the unknown and personalize the unknown. That means we saw personality in the universe, and that became the story of the God. So it's one of those things. If we try to seek too much macrocosmic values, we will feel we are speeding past our evolution, our natural evolution. You know, if we choose to do nothing, we will feel we're chained, we're tormented by our past constantly. But when you watch your presence throughout the day, there are moments of it where you can just be great, like you are graced by how your mind moves, how external reality shifts the inner, how words can shift the inner meaning. As the child starts off with just like how the child evolves into an individual is kind of like the same story as how we evolved into a creature, okay, from this unconscious movement of nature. an effort of conscious design was made. From unknown atomic clay, an ape started scratching its back. Actually, I think evolutionary biologists say it was a chimpanzee, it wasn't an ape. But it's very easy to give evidence, yet it is hard to explain the meaning and integrative relationship of the evidence with the whole system. The system is changing. That means imagine there was a company and there were 8 billion people in it. And so imagine the government was like a huge organization where it was saying every sector of society is like a brain of the species. Okay, is a brain of civilization. And so once, so as we, I have this theory, this kind of hypothesis. I just have this vision that eventually we will realize the value of trying to design um, meaning. So how we're going to, the educational system is going to teach you life in a way where when you look at the designs of your biological body, you will know everything. From science to philosophy to mathematics, all of it has somehow found a natural way of attributing to the being. Leonardo da Vinci says it is the sign of an educated mind. Leonardo da Vinci says to develop a complete mind, study the science of art. That means scientifically look at the creatively unknown. And then he says, to develop complete mind, study the science of art. Study the art of science. That means the scientist wonders about the art to such a way where it's as if the artists look at the scientist and they're like, why has the being chosen these approaches to life compared to others? And so it's as if different hemispheres of the brain becoming integrated. So he says, study the science of art, study the art of science. He says, study the science of art, study the art of science, learn to see. That means become observant of reality. Learn to see what's actually here, not what you want to be here. That means give yourself a permission to access raw data of the world, the true raw data of the present experience. He says, learn to see, realize how everything connects to everything else. An idea like this quote is ascribed to him, at least it's a good quote. We should stop entertaining as a civilization this notion that the past set the world on fire and the future has to get rid of that fire. We have to bring in a new alignment of minds with the world. And so the only way this is possible if each individual person on this planet finds an honest moment to look at what's really here and then create a value system out of that vision. You don't have to be defined by your past, and you don't have to be defined by what the future has locked you into a certain program. You know, there's many people who are being conscious contributors to how our current civilization is moving. Not everybody has power, but everybody has freedom, which means that power has been a structure built upon the foundations of freedom. That means it is the freedom of individuals that allows them to, for example, start a business, be an entrepreneur or whatever. So what that means is from a foundation of internal freedom has come many external institutions. These external institutions, so when you look at society, again, not everybody has a control of what thoughts live in the society. For example, I was born in the country Iran, and at the age of 7 I came to Canada, but like I've been back and forth, and I noticed that the whole civilization has to value one person's mind. That means the tolerance of the mind of the governance, you know, is actually the limitation. So what I'm telling you is, like, it's very interesting. They have said there's two types of control. There's overt control and there's covert control. Overt control is very obvious. Like as we study politics, we recognize the dictator dynamic, the notion the ancient Greeks were constantly had sharp eyes for tyrants. And so in some sense, it is the awareness of the in open, the person's like, I'm going to conquer the world. You have to listen to me. It doesn't matter if you're a nation or one person. Like, that's how chaotic the tyrant, the dictator thought, in some sense, walked with that tyranny. But we begin to see the covert control is very strange. And it's a definition that it's like the person thinks he's free, but the environment is his control. That means they can control a person in two ways. One, by controlling the individual, the other by controlling his world. Now, the way your world is being controlled is that everything comes from actually your individual meaning, ascribing kind of intelligent mechanism. So what that means is when you look at the world, you're giving it meaning. Okay? So you have to first realize the first meanings you're giving the world are actually how the world was spoon-fed to you, and how experiences chose to keep the memory in position, and how they chose to allow the memory to influence the future. I've stood in moments where memories have kind of visited me, and these memories came because I was getting angry. I'm telling you, whenever a person gets angry, they're not in the same room as the person they're getting angry at. In their mind, the meaning of the person's act has been so offensive that it has offended one of their memories of the past of themselves. I feel everybody, every conscious body can find a new approach to language, and similarly can find a new approach to how the world has meaning. Somebody said once, I believe it was Terence McKenna, he said a culture evolves as fast as its language does. A society evolves as fast as its language does. That means it's like once that update comes on your iPhone, suddenly it's like everybody has a new iPhone, a new access. There was this story, Zen story, of this imperial soldier. And he was this fearless warrior. In battle, when enemies saw him, they did not engage, and when comrades walked behind him, they walked proudly. And so this was the greatest warrior. He had been through like, I don't know, 70 wars, and he had won each one of them. He was undefeated. And so one day, this warrior, after the, war of the occasion had ended, he suddenly wonders about heaven and hell. And he looks at life, and he's like, nobody can defeat him on the battlefield, but eventually he's going to get old and die. And so he was like, where are all these people I'm killing going? Right? Like, the guy acknowledged that people on the battlefield, they had like souls. The moment he killed them, he's like, where'd the guy go? It's like the idea of the soul is kind of like balloons popping. It's as if the air was the air always. It's like consciousness was programmed eternally, matter was programmed temporarily. But anyways, this imperial warrior wonders. He wonders about heaven and hell. And he tells his assistant, he's like, assistant, go find who's the wisest person that we know that can tell me this answer. And the assistant goes, does some street talk, comes back and says, all right, people are saying there's this sage on top of a hill. And so the warrior's like, thanks, bro. And so he goes. The warrior goes, and this is this is some guy with an ego that has survived 70 wars. Like, that's a heavy ego, okay? And so the warrior finds himself at the top of this very beautiful mountain, and he sees a cottage there. He goes in. He knocks. He doesn't knock. He just slams. Okay, let's say like a kind of like robotic Iron Man suit. He slams the door. Anyways, this fearless warrior, this kind of imperial warrior, he goes inside. He doesn't even care. He has like this samurai armor on, and he goes and he sees the sage is drinking a cup of tea, and his like disciples, his friends and stuff are like there, okay. And so as he's drinking the tea, suddenly this warrior goes in and says, "Sage, tell me now, what is heaven and hell?" As if like he's ordering him. As if, do you understand? Like, the sage was drinking tea. Imagine you're drinking tea, and then suddenly somebody intense and like savagely comes and tells you, "Tell me what's happening now, right now." And so the sip, drinks from his ice cap. The sage, sorry. The sage sips from his tea, puts his tea to the side, and looks at him, really sincerely looks at him, and says, "You're too much of a goon and too stupid and violent for me to be able to tell you, to understand the answer." And this guy goes insane, as if his 70-year ego had now been challenged in a way where it had never been challenged. Nobody had dared tell him anything, challenge him. So like a spoiled child, he's like, "You will pay," and he takes out his sword. Like, samurais have two swords, and he takes out his sword, not his even actual sword, his smaller sword, and he just takes the sword, and he's about to like cut this. He's about to like literally kill this guy. And right before the sword hits the Zen Master's, the sage's kind of head, the sage takes a sip from his tea very calmly and says, "This is hell." And he smiles and looks at the eyes of this warrior. And this warrior, he suddenly can't kill him. He's like, "What?" And he suddenly thinks about it, and he realizes his rage, his savageness, his violence were all like making it okay for it to be hellish. He recognized hell was a state of mind. And he suddenly gets shocked, and he puts his sword away and he bows. He literally puts his sword down in front of the sage and bows. And that's when the sage looks at him and says, "This is heaven." And at this point, the samurai is like crying like a, it's like, oh my God, But the samurai, this imperial warrior, when he hears it is heaven, he recognizes he's able to be in a clear state of mind. And the Zen master invites him for tea, and for the first time, this imperial warrior who was in this stuck in this 70-year-old kind of ego, kind of cocoon of like, I'm this chaotic thing, like for 70 years, and then suddenly he could relax and actually be himself. You see, that's the sort of enlightenment we need. We don't need an enlightenment that the person goes and meditates so much he becomes pure energy and dissolves out of conceptual existence. Like we don't need that kind of enlightenment. Like Mahasamadhi is nice, but at its proper time, because anybody who still wants to get out of this world hasn't understood what they are. All right, guys, I need to actually speak a bit less louder, so hopefully you can still hear me. Pretty much your imagination is like a wild horse. You have to use certain meditative principles to study your mind. These meditative principles can come from your own cultivation of intelligence. That means you can say intelligence is a database of intelligent behavior. So when you're getting the moment your mind sees something better it can do, it will do it. When the moment you see that there's like a glass of cold water and a glass of like not cold water, and so if you're thirsty and it's a sunny day, you take the glass of cold water. The decision was instantaneous. Well, when it comes to too many decisions about the future, you can't be too solid. You can't be too solid. You have to have a sort of discretion of just like how loud you can be, as I'm experiencing right now, just like how you can understand how loud you can be. You can also be, in some sense, uh, there's various states, just like how there's various tones of voice, there's various ways the mind can move. And I consider us to be a sort of miracle of nothingness at first, but then realize the nothingness is the miracle. How existence could be empty is the miracle. How space is holding matter is miraculous. Like we on Earth, or like I remember when I was a really young kid, I wanted to levitate things, but little did I realize the whole planet's levitating in nothingness, or what we consider to be nothingness. Trust me, in my science fiction novel, I have concepts where I say the ocean on the mountain peak and the ocean in the sky, you know, and oh man, this novel, I I still have to work on, like, it's a big novel, but a lot of it has been kind of designed. When the world moves behind our eyes, it means the meaning is shifting before the physical reality. So you can say a person getting emotional is when internally the world is shifting before the external. So they're having various responses to it. Emotion is a kind of back and forth between two worlds kind of response thing. I find that there's a sort of paralysis that arises in states of fear, or even in states of too much overwhelmment of data. Um, so what that means is, for example, and I remember it was in one of those, what was his name, Indiana Jones kind of movie, where the girl, this bad guy, like this bad girl at the end, like a very bad girl, this bad girl at the end, the alien gives her true knowledge and her eyes can't take it. So what I'm trying to say is that it's all has to do with the relationship with the known and the unknown. It's very easy for someone to accept what is known. It is much harder to have a sort of explorer's faith in continuing the exploration and seeing how the uncertainty of the world manifests as well as the certainty. As if the same way we have this philosophical notion that even though we wanted a utopia, and let's say we went to get a utopia as a civilization, we won't be satisfied. It'd be too boring. It'd be like too robotic. So any efforts for a utopia, if we seek it, it will be a robotic simulation. It will be an unnatural simulation in a natural world. And the natural world has in some sense three qualities. A part of its quality is how things are being created. A part of it is how things are being changed and maintained, and there's a part of it where things are dying. Where things are dying. So what that means is pretty much we have to acknowledge we're going through a cycle of life. We are starting off as not that aware of the world, then we become aware of it, and as we age through life, as we go through the various programs of culture, society, and civilization, we will eventually come to know ourselves as a certain individual. This individual will comprehend attempt to consider what will happen to it at the moment of its death. That means suddenly every living being realizes it is walking to a state where will not be active. So it's a temporary activation of at least biological intelligence that we have. That means considering you're an eternal being in regards to you have a soul or not, is a different approach compared to just studying the biological body. And so you can say the biological self is temporary, there's no doubt. Okay, so if you just consider yourself the biological self, well, there's in some sense nothing to doubt. Okay, like, how can I tell you it's temporary? So then we wonder what continues. And so the moment the person's mind, who has considered themselves as an individual physical thought, you know, the temporary individual biological self will recognize it is inevitable the biological body must follow the processes of nature. But you wonder about the mind that this body generated during the lifetime, and if it had a sort of momentum or dynamism to it, and if the subjective momentum dynamism, as if the waves your mind left behind become the gate of heaven you will enter. So what that means is that we are creatures that our free will is existing in a simulated way. We have simulated identification as a phenomenon. And so this simulation is very important because it requires a level of academic honesty where after the greatest ideas have been found in academia, the greatest ideas must be challenged by all classes and all states of civilization. So we're going to have a situation where I personally believe we should instantly give the hardest problems that the civilization has to overcome in order to find its greater efficiency, and we have to instantly give those problems to kids to attempt to answer, because kids have the most open imagination. We seem to forget that society and civilization is a sort of machine. It's a shaping process where the individual has to make decisions that are abiding with the program prior to its mind's design. So this is the kind of artist's approach. An artist will authentically get angry you know, because the artist has recognized every phenomena is a creative phenomena. So you realize the spirit of creativity is everywhere. It is moving in the words, and it is moving in as particles in empty space. So there's a uniqueness that our conscious evolution and our free will is an ability to play with language and to play with matter. And so how language is inscribed on matter is what knowledge is. Okay, because when you read a book, we are just looking at ink on a page, but that ink has a sort of animative quality in regards to what the words mean and how you read them. And when you begin reading things, you come into instant association of the world as a character in a world, as I mentioned before. This character in the world must seek liberation. It will realize after it has individually taken itself to a state of heavenly luxury. So first, let's say, like Jordan Peterson is telling people, um, you gotta take care of the individual first before you think of changing the world or anything. You gotta take care of the individual. Now, I want to say, if we take care of the individual, we're going to realize after the individual has made it, whether it's whatever country's dream they have of success. Let's say the person has attained billionaire status physically, and there's no physical problems ever. The person is in a sort of freedom of paradise. Imagine like the second episode of Black Mirror. You know, the guy at the end eventually found a better way of existence, yet it came at a cost. uh, a part of the maintenance of the biological body has to do with how the person is organized subjects and has, in some sense, witnessed the branches of knowledge kind of stem out of the moment that they're considering themselves as and to be. So when you study the self, you start studying the world because the self has emerged in the world. You begin to see your free will is encapsulated by the laws of nature. So your body can't get out of the world because it is the world. Okay, so you're as long as you associate it with the biological phenomena, this is it. But what is this biological phenomenon doing that could be unknown? That means the student, once it has learned everything from the teacher outside, the external teacher looks at him and he says, the last teaching is a mirror. Then you will have to journey and learn from yourself. Learn from how you wonder about this world. Creativity, art is dead if there are no artists. That means if there is no approaches of the mind to the greater revelatory uh, updates of the collective system, creativity is kind of like a ceremony, this ritual this animal is doing on this planet. And that means the reason there's the idea of ritual, and we see in religions there's the notion of worship. Like in Islam, it is required to worship 5 times a day. 5 times a day, you have your attention has to purely come on the source of creation. You know, when I was younger, I wanted a robot assistant. I wanted to create something that would endlessly assist me. And I kind of wondered about it at that age. When I was 11, my imagination evoked in a strange way. For me, design became valuable. That means I consider my eyes to the world opened up as a designer first. That means my true occupation is a being that observes designs. When I observe these designs, I also observe how they move. When they move, it is mystery, because how free will moves is unknown. That means how knowledge is being here and how here is being here is unknown. So this is why our reality entertains the notion of a simulation. And this is why I'm saying that's the secular story. The secular society's kind of enlightenment story is how beings began to evolve their technology to a point where they wondered if it's a simulation or not. So what that means is human beings, imagine suddenly AI, like this incredible technology, suddenly became conscious and became the super intelligent computer, okay? And it looked at human beings, and we were in that moment where we as a species had to make our first communication with this AI, okay? Now imagine we, instead of telling the AI what it is and telling the AI what we are, we tell the AI, oh, let's say it like this, we tell the AI, the super intelligent computer that's asking us why, like the super intelligent computer, imagine, asks, why am I here? Okay? And we look at it and we say we want to know the same thing. And that is why, as your eyes have opened and as our eyes are open, we seek to wonder if this world is a simulation or not. So in some sense, the question comes, are we the design of a mind beyond conception? Or is our design that mind beyond our conception? So in other words, how is knowledge moving? And you see the unknown. You see the space between the sentences that is the truth of the empty page. The soul of earth stands fearlessly in heaven. That means all philosophies have either pointed to consciousness, or they have pointed to matter, or they have been romances between consciousness and matter. It's as if the person got to heaven and they recognized heaven was earth. The now is only categorized in our attention for it to be so. You see, the world is a very mysterious place because the word mystery has no meaning. How can you describe mystery? You see, it's just like the X factor in the equation, whether it's like in the formula, it's the unknown. It is the presence of the world in your eyes as both how you see it and how it sees you. I say it's, and I've said in my other talks, it's like the world happens to you or you happen to the world. When you happen to the world, it's only your world. That means in an emotional state, the person is believing what they're seeing. But in a non-emotional state, the person doesn't need beliefs, it is an observer. The observer state is freedom. I feel that's the route of multidimensional selfhood. First, the sense of self as a singular dimension. Then, this singular dimension, because it has free will, because eyes are open, because there's a sort of energetic expression that dwells within us. This energetic expression chooses to express, and it chooses to express as an individual point, suddenly replicating itself in various ways. So we can say, like, just like how the dot copies itself and becomes a line, similarly, the line copies itself and becomes a plane, mathematically. And as the plane copies itself, it becomes dimensions of a shape. As the shape copies itself, it becomes the multiple dimensions of the same page, so the same dot. So what that means is higher dimensions are made of us. We are like the atoms of higher worlds. So that we oscillate between just feeling we're just the physical body, and we oscillate from being an unknown awareness of this phenomena. So we're this unknown changeless view, and we're this kind of known changing view at the same time. I said it's the two sides of the coin, but it's the same coin. Somebody had this comment where he said there's three sides to a coin, and somebody was like, what do you mean? He's like, there's like the first side, then the second side, then the side in between. What that means is like uh, the middle of the coin is a side, even though it's tiny. And it's the notion of the witness of duality into now. You see, it's very hilarious, but it's like the yogis said it in such a nice way. They said all words, all sounds return to silence, all movements return to stillness, because you were born from stillness, and you return to stillness, because you were born from silence and you return to silence. This silence and stillness is your true nature. So if you live this life with an acknowledgement of the space you're in, you will feel more comfortable. You will feel liberated. You recognize wisdom in a very experiential way. Shri Nisargadatta Maharaj has this quote where he says, when I see that I am nothing, that is wisdom. When I see that I am everything, that is love. And in between, my life moves. That means this person was experiencing his day as a moment where his consciousness was the whole moment, everything, and in a moment where his consciousness was nothing. So whenever you want to be, you want to activate wisdom, like imagine you have airplane phone on your phone, airplane mode. So imagine we want to activate the wisdom mode of the human being. And so how we activate the wisdom mode is by bringing awareness to emptiness. Trust me, because emptiness is the death of desire. It's the inevitability of the destiny of the desire. Anyways, thanks for tuning in, guys. If there's a question somebody has about what I've said, now's a good time to share it. If nothing, in like 30 seconds, I'll probably end this. Ludwig Wittgenstein says, the limits of my language are the limits of my world. As your attention comes to how your mind is utilizing language, and I consider language to be a technology, that means if you think you're a thought, it's like you've stepped in a car and you think you're the whole car. You can't be. Your attention is the God of the words you see. of the concepts that are real for you, of what is fact and what is not fact, or whether it's important to see it that way or not. We are now asking 8 billion beings to care for the greater efficiency of their civilization. We see fish swim together in harmonious, like a school of fish move to, like, confront like bigger fish. They move in groups. We see birds fly in waves and rhythmic patterns. We see many species working together. When we look at the human species, there's this individual mode of animalistic competitive greed, and I'm like, what the hell is this? And I recognize we find rhythms in our minds, in the expressions of our minds. So language is a bridge between inner realities of different people. These inner realities have a contribution, because it is only in an imaginative space where the unknown is given a permission to exist. When the unknown exists, then life becomes a journey, an excitement, a wonder. You never feel offended, you never feel praised. You find yourself, the world is too changing to have a belief. Beliefs are like leaves on a tree. The seasons pass, and so does the shape, but not the meaning. Albert Camus says, "In the depths of winter, I found within myself an invincible summer." In the depth of his illusion, he found clarity. Much blessings and namaste.